First foremost, I want no further conflict with him.
You tell him from me that he can live or he can die.
Vincent.
At 83 years old, Al Pacino became a father again, and the first thing he did when he heard the news was ask for a DNA test because he genuinely couldn't believe his own biology had allowed it. The woman who gave birth to his son was 29 years old. The man who once commanded $20 million per film had, 12 years earlier, lost $50 million to a criminal accountant and spent years doing work he despised just to stay financially alive. In 2020, his heart stopped beating altogether, and paramedics had to revive him. When he recovered, he told people directly that the experience had left him certain of one thing: nothing waits on the other side. No afterlife, no reunion, just an ending. And yet he keeps going, still working at 84, still raising a young son through video calls and harmonica sessions, still teaching young actors at the institution where he once learned the craft himself. This is the story of how the man who gave the world Michael Corleone, Tony Montana, and Frank Slade ended up here, and why the distance between where he started and where he stands now is one of the most extraordinary journeys American cinema has ever produced. Alfredo James Pacino was born on April 25, 1940, in East Harlem, New York City, to two Sicilian immigrants who had crossed an ocean to build something better. His father, Salvatore Pacino, and his mother, Rosa Girardi, didn't last long as a family. Salvatore left for California when the boy was just 2 years old, took a job selling insurance on the West Coast, and didn't look back. Rosa moved with her son to the South Bronx, where her parents Kate and James Girardi helped carry the weight of raising a child alone. Those grandparents had emigrated from Corleone, Sicily, a town that would eventually become known worldwide because of a film their grandson helped define. Growing up in the Bronx during the 1940s and 1950s meant understanding scarcity early, and the absence of his father left a mark that shaped nearly every significant decision Pacino would make about family and commitment for the rest of his life. His friends called him Sonny, a nickname that didn't quite match the reality of those years. By 9, he had already started smoking and drinking. Marijuana entered the picture at 13. School held almost no grip on him, and a pattern of fights, truancy, and expulsions followed him through adolescence before he eventually landed at the High School of Performing Arts, which seemed like the right fit until it wasn't. At 17, after a confrontation with his mother over his future, he walked out without a diploma and without anything resembling a plan. The city absorbed him. He ran with a group of friends who shared his directionlessness, and 3 of them, Cliffy, Bruce, and Pi, later died from drug overdoses. That same fate could easily have found him, but acting kept redirecting his energy, giving the restlessness a channel that led somewhere other than self-destruction. He later said plainly that without acting, he might not have made it out at all. Then the losses came in fast succession. In 1962, when Pacino was 22, his mother Rosa died at 43 after years of battling depression. And a year after that, his grandfather James, who had functioned as the closest thing to a father throughout his entire childhood, died as well. 2 people in 2 years, the 2 who mattered most, and Pacino later called it the lowest point of his life. In his 2024 memoir, Sonny Boy, named after the nickname his mother gave him, he wrote that if he were lucky, he might someday get to walk up to her and simply say, "Hey Ma, see what happened to me." Grief became fuel. Acting became the only available escape, and survival meant taking jobs as a janitor, a busboy, a messenger, and a postal clerk, just to pay for classes at HB Studio in Greenwich Village, where a teacher named Charlie Layton became one of the most important mentors of his early career. There were stretches with no bed to sleep in, couch surfing through friends' apartments, and occasionally sleeping in theaters when nowhere else was available. The same kind of theaters where he would one day be celebrated. The shift began in 1968, when Pacino starred in The Indian Wants the Bronx, an off-Broadway play by Israel Horovitz that opened at the Astor Place Theater on January 17th and ran for 177 performances. His portrayal of a character named Murph carried a dangerous, layered quality that critics hadn't encountered from someone this unknown, and the Obie Award for Best Actor followed. More importantly, a man named Martin Bregman watched from the audience, recognized something worth investing in, and became his manager, a relationship that would later position Pacino for The Godfather, Serpico, and Dog Day Afternoon. In 1969, his Broadway debut came with Does a Tiger Wear a Necktie?, a production about teenage drug addiction that ran for only 39 performances at the Belasco Theater, but produced a Tony Award for Best Featured Actor. Newsweek's Jack Kroll called him a hood with a poetic soul, and Variety named him the most promising new Broadway theater actor working. At 29, without a high school diploma or a reliable income, he held one of theater's highest prizes. Casting him in The Godfather in 1972 required Francis Ford Coppola to fight a sustained battle against Paramount Pictures, who wanted established names: Jack Nicholson, Warren Beatty, Robert Redford, or Ryan O'Neal. Pacino had one film credit. The studio tested James Caan for the role of Michael Corleone and handed Coppola a choice: keep Pacino, but only if Caan played Sonny. Even after principal photography started, studio executives watched early footage and pushed for Pacino's removal. Coppola's response was to move the restaurant assassination scene forward in the schedule, a scene where Michael takes his first real step into organized crime. And when the executives saw what Pacino did in that moment, the argument stopped. The film grossed over $250 million against a $6 million budget, won Best Picture at the Academy Awards, and transformed Pacino from a stage actor into one of cinema's defining figures. He earned a nomination for Best Supporting Actor, but boycotted the ceremony entirely, refusing to attend because he felt the categorization diminished the work. That refusal to quietly accept what institutions handed him would repeat throughout his career. Serpico arrived in 1973, with Pacino playing Frank Serpico, the real NYPD officer who exposed systemic corruption within his own department and paid for it with his career and very nearly his life. Director Sidney Lumet shot the film on actual New York City streets during a brutal summer, and Pacino spent time with the real Serpico beforehand to absorb the specific weight of isolation that comes from standing against everyone around you. Made on a modest budget, the film earned nearly $30 million and delivered another Oscar nomination alongside a Golden Globe win. Then came Scarface in 1983, directed by Brian De Palma from an Oliver Stone screenplay, positioning Pacino inside Tony Montana, a Cuban refugee who tears his way to the summit of Miami's cocaine trade through violence, paranoia, and a will that doesn't recognize any ceiling. During production, Pacino grabbed a hot gun barrel and burned his hand badly enough to delay filming. The Cuban community in Miami organized protests against the portrayal, arguing it reduced their community to criminal stereotypes, and parts of the shoot relocated to Los Angeles. Critics attacked the violence and relentless profanity when it released. The film made $66 million worldwide, and then it kept growing, finding a second and third life in hip-hop music culture, video games, and pop culture conversations about ambition and excess, until Tony Montana's name carried more cultural weight than most real people's ever would. The Academy Award the industry had been withholding finally came in 1992, with Scent of a Woman. Pacino played Lieutenant Colonel Frank Slade, a blind and deeply bitter Army veteran who spends a weekend with a prep school student named Charlie Sims, played by Chris O'Donnell. The role demanded more than technique alone. Pacino wore opaque contact lenses that blocked his actual vision during filming, and carried a cane even when cameras weren't rolling, letting the physical reality of blindness settle into his body rather than remaining a performance choice. The tango scene, where Slade leads a young woman flawlessly across a dance floor despite seeing nothing, became one of those cinematic moments that other films keep returning to as reference. When the Oscar for Best Actor came that night, it felt to most observers less like a triumph and more like a long overdue correction. The financial collapse arrived in 2011, when Pacino's longtime accountant, Kenneth Starr, was exposed as the operator of a Ponzi scheme through which he had been stealing from Hollywood's highest earners for years. When the structure fell apart, Starr was arrested and sentenced to 7 years in prison, and $50 million that Pacino had accumulated across decades of defining performances had vanished. He returned from a vacation in Europe to find the accounts empty. In Sonny Boy, he described the realization plainly. He had $50 million, and then he had nothing. Recovery meant accepting roles he had no artistic connection to, including Jack and Jill, which he openly admitted was purely a paycheck decision. Speaking engagements, commercials, and what he called a crazy montage of choices filled the gap between where he was and where he needed to get back to. Running alongside the acting career was a quieter life as a director and teacher. Looking for Richard in 1996 blended documentary filmmaking with dramatized scenes from Shakespeare's Richard III, gathering performers including Alec Baldwin, Winona Ryder, Kevin Spacey, Kenneth Branagh, and Vanessa Redgrave to argue that theater belongs to everyone willing to engage with it. The Directors Guild of America named it the Outstanding Documentary of 1997, Chinese Coffee in 2000, adapted from Ira Lewis's stage play that Pacino had performed live in 1992, confined him and Jerry Orbach to a single room for one night of conversation, set in 1982 Greenwich Village, a film that reached most of its audience only through a DVD release in 2007. Since 2000, Pacino has served as co-president of the Actors Studio, alongside Ellen Burstyn and Harvey Keitel, continuing the work that Lee Strasberg and Charlie Layton once did for him, guiding actors through workshops built around philosophy and literature as much as performance technique, the same approach that pulled him off the streets of the Bronx decades earlier. Marriage never entered his life, and in Sonny Boy, he described it plainly as an entrance to the pain train. Diane Keaton, who met him on the Godfather set in 1972, stayed connected to him on and off for years until 1990, when filming The Godfather Part 3 brought the question back, and she delivered an ultimatum: commit or she was done. He couldn't commit. Kathleen Quinlan, who entered his life at a party hosted by Lee Strasberg in 1979, came the closest to changing that pattern, a relationship that stretched across years before Pacino backed away at the final moment, a decision he later described as heartbreaking. His daughter Julie Marie was born in 1989 with acting coach Jan Tarrant. Twins Anton James and Olivia Rose arrived in 2001 with Beverly D'Angelo. And then, in June 2023, at 83, Roman was born to Noor Al-Falah, who was 29 years old and had previously been publicly linked to Mick Jagger and Clint Eastwood. The 54-year age gap drew attention from everywhere. Pacino's first response was requesting a paternity test, because fathering a child at his age seemed biologically impossible to him. The results confirmed it. Even after separating from Al-Falah, he stayed present through video calls and harmonica sessions with his son, determined not to repeat what his own father had done to him in 1942. When his heart stopped in 2020 and paramedics pulled him back, something settled in him that hadn't been there before. He came back from that experience convinced that nothing waits after the body stops. No continuation, no reunion with the mother he lost when he was 22, no version of the afterlife that organized religion promises. He said it directly and without apparent anguish. At 84, with House of Gucci behind him and upcoming projects including Modi, directed by Johnny Depp and centered on painter Amedeo Modigliani, The Ritual, based on the documented exorcism case of Emma Schmidt, along with Billy Knight and Killing Castro still ahead. The boy from the South Bronx who slept in theaters and lost 3 friends to drug addiction and watched $50 million disappear never stopped searching for the next role that might mean something. His mother took him to the movies once to show him what stories could do. He spent 60 years proving she understood something essential.